Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us here this afternoon. We are really excited to have a chance to talk to a bunch of MOSEF schools about hardware and kind of getting things off the ground for your esports program. This is kind of in partnership with MOSEF and Gravity Gaming by Bytespeed, alongside a big lift from Intel. So we definitely want to shout them out and say thank you for making this happen and a couple other things that we're doing with MOSEF this year. So big shout out to Intel and welcome to everybody joining. Again, this is kind of a starter guide for hardware and streaming. Getting esports going in your schools. We've got two awesome other panelists alongside me today. Just introduction, super quick. My name's Josh Knutson. I am the Gravity Gaming Solutions Director here at Bytespeed. Former college head coach. I got my start back at the University of Jamestown up in North Dakota. So you'll hear my accent. I am definitely not from Missouri. The northern accent will definitely come through, especially if I have those long O's. But I did the college esports thing for 3.5 years and then joined Bytespeed in 2019 to help kind of take over the department here and really guide the schools that we work with on how to set up successful programs. And I've gotten to work with a lot of awesome people over the course of the last 5 years, 5.5 years now at Bytespeed, including the two guests that we have here on the panel. Make sure you grab all my contact information, take a screenshot, call, text, email, Twitter, Discord, whatever works best for you. Happy to sit down and have a conversation about your school if you'd like to talk a little bit more one-on-one. Enough about me. I'm gonna open up the floor real quick before we get started into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. Tony, Adam, do you guys just want to go ahead and introduce yourselves? Let us know kind of what your journey with esports has been so far, and then we can kind of talk more about hardware.
Adam, do you want to go first since you're the letter A?
Okay. So I'm Adam Touche. I'm the tech person at Richland R1 School District in Essex, Missouri. And I'm also the head coach of our esports program. And this is our 6th year here at Richland. And so I'm here to talk about, we've bought some computers and some accessories for our lab through Bytespeed and kind of here to help out. So thanks,
Awesome.
Josh.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for being here, Adam.
Yeah, so my name is Tony Grignani. I currently serve as the president of MOSEF. I founded or helped found MOSEF back in 2019 as a nonprofit dedicated to increasing accessibility to esports. I've also currently served as a principal or assistant principal at Webster Groves High School, and I've started two esports program, one at Hickman High School and one at Webster Groves. And I've also supported many schools in starting their own programs. And I've had the pleasure of working with Josh like probably since 2019. So we've been on this journey together since we all began.
Since the good old days, right?
The good old days.
Yeah. One other quick programming note for everybody joining us here. We will have the recording of today's webinar on the Bytespeed YouTube channel. If you want to refer back to it, later, if there's stuff that you want to make sure that you have access to it, we'll also send that link out to everybody through email when we're done. The chat and the Q&A function are both live. If you have questions that pop up, please feel free to put those in there. We'll get to it, be able to answer it from a couple of different perspectives, from the manufacturer kind of vendor side, but also, with Tony and Adam here, straight from the school side, which is definitely going to be good to have their input and perspective. So please feel free to use those. We'll get to it. And if you're watching the YouTube recording, thanks for being here. Drop your questions in the comments below and we'll make sure to reach out. That being said, let's kind of dive in. And I kind of have today's webinar really broken up into like 4 or 5 sections. And I think before we talk about hardware and before we kind of get to what goes into building out your lab, I think it's really important to start with the question of like, why are we doing this in the first place? Over the years, we know that schools add esports for a number of different reasons, right? That student engagement piece being by far the most kind of common. but with the expanded opportunities for that competitive state championship level play on that side of things, just the social and emotional growth of adding students to maybe their first extracurricular ever. There's a great stat out there that gets thrown out a bunch that most of the students that play esports are a part of our programs. They don't do traditional sports, or they don't do fine arts, or some of those other activities in the school. Adam and Tony, I'd love for you guys to kind of talk about, why you started the programs at your schools, and kind of what's been the main draw of getting kids in and participating throughout the year. Knowing that there's a bunch of different reasons why, would love to hear from you guys, actually at the school level, what you've seen and kind of what your journey's been for Richland and Webster, and kind of where you're coming from.
Yeah, so at Richland, we really cater to the students that don't play the traditional sports. We have some that do, and they kind of balance between both. But it's been really good to increase like after school activities, and that's kind of where we shine. And then I treat it like a traditional sport. So we have regular practices. They're expected to be there, expected to make their matches and such. So that's kind of our student engagement.
Awesome. Tony, what about you guys at Webster?
Well, at Webster and at Hickman, we've seen the engagement go through the roof. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to start MOSEF, is because, kind of like what Adam was saying, we were hitting a demographic of student that didn't really feel like they had a place in our school, or hadn't been part of a team or anything else like that. And through that time, I've just had so many stories of, yeah, students have had big wins on the stage or things like that, but I think some of the ones I'm most proud of is just seeing the growth in our students, from a social emotional side of things. Kids that are gaining confidence and maturing and becoming leaders, every day through these programs, and those are the most fun stories to tell. Adam, I still tell your story all the time. Of your young man who got over his fear of talking, right? So
Yeah, and he spoke. He was able to put on a speech after having been in esports. But for a lot of these students, a lot of them have never been on a team and have never had to communicate with their teammates. So that is a huge benefit for this program. Is I see a lot of new kids come in, and they don't know what it's like to have to communicate and be a teammate. And so this is a great opportunity for them to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if anybody is watching today and kind of wondering, like, hey, we're just getting started, we're adding a program maybe this fall or coming up in this winter, have kind of an idea of where your kids are coming from, and if you can build out a program that hits a lot of these benchmarks, I think you're going to be super successful, and probably have more kids knocking on the door than you realize, which is always a great problem to have. So I like to kind of talk about that frame of reference before we get into it, because it really centers around like why we're doing this and the impact that we can have for students, which is the number one reason. So kind of in more of the nuts and bolts perspective of actually finding a facility. There's a lot. If you look at the picture on screen here, this is the lab that I built at University of Jamestown way back in the day. This was an old student media center in the basement of our library, which it's incredible how many basement of library labs there are out there. But this was a student media center that was used by the newspaper at the college, and there's like a TV station kind of radio set up down there too that hadn't been used in years. Wasn't a focus for the mass communication program anymore. So this is the unused space on campus, which we were, looking and identified it as somewhere in the building or on campus that would work well for us to move in and start a small lab. And, finding that space and really identifying the needs of that space or I think the first real big question that we ask. And there's kind of like a checklist that I like to go through. The first thing on the top of that list is just like, how much space do we have available? What can we fit in here as far as stations are concerned, how many students can be in here before we hit fire code, all those other types of things of like, just making sure that we have a space big enough for the demand and for the need. The 50 kids that are pounding on the door and want to play, what's the space that's going to work best for our numbers and for fitting everything in there as far as equipment is concerned. And to go along with that, I think that accessibility piece is super, super important. Kind of going back to, you're going to have students that aren't, maybe able to play traditional sports. I think everybody kind of uses like the wheelchair student example as like a really topical one that fits in a lot of places where, that student might not have the ability to play basketball or football or volleyball. But they can roll up to a gaming station and play, Rocket League, just like your able-bodied students, and making sure that that room is set out for wheelchair access, for ADA access. I think that that's a really great opportunity that we have to spread the ability for students to participate, and definitely, in an education environment, top of mind for a lot of places. After that, kind of on your punch list, power and internet definitely are important, just because we have technology in the building that's what we're using to play the sport and to actually participate. So making sure that the building is, or the room is wired to handle, 10, 15 computers or whatever you're putting in that space. And making sure that when you turn all those machines on, you're not going to blow a fuse to half the school and have to explain to somebody that, the classroom next door doesn't have power because we started up the gaming machines. So, working with
That has happened to us, Josh.
Oh, really?
There's one breaker in here we try to avoid because it's a little touchy.
Sure. Yeah. So that's definitely something to look at when you're identifying spaces. It's like, is it set up to handle the equipment that we're putting in there? Same thing with internet. I really recommend that you look at a wired internet connection, if at all possible, whether that means, hey, we have to run cables and put in some extra drops in that room, or maybe we just decide that, like, hey, we need to find a space that's closer to a network closet, or might already be wired up for machines to go in. We try and say, hey, don't do this on Wi-Fi if at all possible. I know not everybody, has the ability to do that. But you're going to have a much better time if you have that kind of physical wired connection for management and just kind of your end user experience. And then kind of the last thing on here, it might seem a little silly, but HVAC and lighting. That facility we built in Jamestown did not have working air conditioning the first year. And a bunch of sweaty 18-year-olds in a room with 15, 20 computers got hot real quick in August and September. And then, in the cooler months in the wintertime, just making sure that you have, temperature regulation to keep things comfortable, keep your students comfortable, and don't have those big wide swings to keep your equipment up and running for as long as possible. So definitely things to double check before you choose a space. And then maybe look at lighting of like, hey, let's make sure that we can control how bright the lights are, and not really shoot for the dark, dim lit room, or have the ability to bring lights on, and kind of make sure that the facility matches the intention of what we're doing. Those are just definitely kind of things that we run through with schools when we talk to them. I'm curious, Adam and Tony, when you guys were finding your facility, finding your rooms in the school, what did that process look like? What were the conversations that you had either with the other admin in the building or with your facilities people? Maybe kind of just take us through that journey. And Adam, maybe we start with you with the nice, since you're in your facility right now and have that as a nice backdrop.
Sure. So the main focus of mine when getting started was, do we have enough internet drops? Sure. And we were really lucky to be able to get our old lab. So this room was the computer lab back in the day, and it was white and boring walls. And this took several years before we got it looking the way it does here, but it already had the internet drops, and it had the power drops for all the computers that were in here before. We noticed we weren't getting students in here as frequently because they all were on their Chromebooks in the classroom. So there was kind of a shift, and we somewhat forcibly took over this space. You may not always have that luxury. So there are some other classrooms we looked into that had more drops, like they had a few computers here and there. And then I've heard of other schools like bringing in a switch into a room that, you know, didn't have enough drops. You could bring in a dedicated switch for esports, and then now you have more ports to plug into.
Sure.
So we were pretty fortunate with the choice to take over our old lab.
Gotcha. So Adam, was there anything in that lab beforehand, or just kind of assuming you guys went 1-to-1 and that room was just kind of like not being used a ton, or?
Well, we had the desktops. We had about 20 desktops in like little cubicles. And I
Okay.
wish I had a picture prepared because it looked rather boring. Just old wooden desks with the cubicles with the computer in there, kind of what you would have seen in the labs maybe 10 years ago.
Sure.
So we actually ended up using some of those computers, and we just put some graphics cards in them, and then we could play Rocket League our first season. I think we
Sure.
played Smite too. So
Gotcha.
we were able to kind of use some of the existing materials in the room.
Gotcha. Tony, from a Hickman or a Webster perspective, when you guys were looking at those labs, what was kind of the story there?
It's kind of similar to Adam's, but real quick, I got a DM from one of our people on Discord that said that the chat is disabled. I don't know if
Oh,
that's gonna be changed or not. But while you're working on that, so yeah, I was fortunate to be the head principal when I was at Hickman, so I had a little more leverage to find the space. And similar to what Adam said, we targeted our old labs because our school went 1-to-1 with devices, so we had gotten rid of the desktops, but all the power and internet drops were still there for when it was a computer lab. So it was a really easy space from a structural side of things, but some things that you might encounter that aren't related and kind of aren't on the list is just politics of your school. So, like, even though I was the head principal, I had a library staff that very much wanted to use that space for a maker space type area, and there was a little bit of conflict between that, and so we had to do a usage analysis to see, well, how many students are actually going in there and using the things that are in there for that, or could that space be done someplace else? And eventually I didn't force them. I didn't say I'm the principal, so we're doing this anyways. They were willing to give it a shot, and once they saw the esports space and how many students came into it, it was great. And they fully bought in. On the lighting side of things, some really like cheap solutions. So like we got some blackout curtains for the windows that were in there because one side was all windows, which isn't ideal for gaming. And
right.
then we also installed, like, I think it was like $120, maybe even cheaper, were some LED lights that we could put in the ceiling that we could dim. So like the fluorescent lights that were in there didn't they were full on all the time. And so
Sure.
we could turn those off, and then we could not only dim the lights using the LEDs that we put in, but we could also change the color,
Yeah.
of the lighting in there, and do kind of fun things like that. So it's even doing stuff like Adam's lab where it's got that cool lighting going on. I don't know if he wants to share or not, but like simple things like that look really cool. Sorry, that is my daughter who is home here right now. Um, look really cool, and but they're low cost and probably easy things to do.
Sure.
Yeah, so we've gone through different renditions of the lighting in this room. I will say I was always jealous of the lighting that Tony had there at Hickman, those little LED lights that were like stuck in the ceiling looking straight down. I always
Yeah.
thought those were cool. We had rope lights under the tables, but the kids bump them with their knees and the chairs, and so those
Sure.
I had to do away with those. But you can get them pretty cheap on Amazon, and right now you can kind of see it in the middle there. Those are light bars, and they're like $20-$30 a piece. And I put them on each one of the tables, and you can control their colors. And it just adds, it lights up the room just enough. It's behind the monitor, so it's like cool ambient lighting. But you don't need that to get started. But I use it more as like a wow factor when kids are looking in the room.
I think that's a great example of like, little things that you can do that are super cost effective that make a big difference. And it might not seem like that's a big deal, but when a kid walks in or a parent walks in and they can see that like, hey, it's a little bit more than just like a computer lab with fancy computers in it, right? It is like your esports facility. And I think that goes a long way. And as you guys have mentioned, it can be something really affordable if you're able to do kind of those extra things. So,
And you don't have to do it all in year one. Like you
right.
can year one might just be, hey, I'm just glad we got desks and some chairs that we found in storage, but we got good computers and we're good to go. And then year two, you fundraise or get your administration to buy in, and then you could add in other things as well, So I think it's good to set like a 3-year plan of what you want to do in your space, so you know what to go to your administration and ask them specifically what you want, and I think makes it more prepared, and you have a higher chance of success when you can show your admin that you have a plan and you have a vision of what you want to accomplish in that space.
For sure. The last kind of point on here while we talk about, just choosing a location, a lot of the schools that we work with use their esports labs as a multi-purpose space. They're doing curriculum work, whether it's, CAD stuff maybe during the day or Adobe work or something where you need maybe a little bit stronger PC than a Chromebook or something like an end user device that your students might have. A lot of the schools that we work with will use their gaming machines during the day for that kind of in the classroom work. And then after school, you flip the firewall switch and all of a sudden now we're gaming on that equipment. So I think it's important, like if that's going to be your scenario and it won't just be a dedicated gaming lab, just to make sure and check in with the other teachers and the other students, that are going to need to use that space and that equipment. Just kind of make sure that their needs are set and met. As you kind of deploy the hardware across the school and figure out, what that'll look like from a day-to-day perspective. Just real quick, Tony, Adam, do you guys do anything outside of the gaming stuff in your labs, or are they just meant for the esports team now?
So I actually teach a class in here, and but there's only 4 students. And then I've got actually an Optima panel that we purchased from Bytespeed. I've got that in the room behind the camera here. So I use that when I teach during the regular class periods. And then we're also fortunate. We've got the PCs locked down to where we're just the only ones that use it. But that's kind of unique. You're not going to find that in a whole lot of other scenarios. It's usually dual purpose for like a CAD class, like you said.
Sure.
Yeah, in both spots that I've been in, I was able to make them dedicated esports spaces. I've talked to other schools that I've helped start programs or consulted with, and they've gone that route. The interesting part that comes in with the multi-purpose is always from the firewall internet security side of things and what's opened up in that room. And so that's just the only tricky thing to pulling it off is you gotta have an IT person that is all in and will come up with creative solutions for when that firewall is up and down to support your gaming. But yeah, both of my spaces right now are dedicated esports spaces, at least for
Perfect.
now.
Gotcha. Awesome. So now in our hypothetical setting of like, hey, we found a space. Now, what are we going to fill it with? It's kind of like the next area that we like to talk through. There's kind of again, I really like this kind of needs versus wants conversation. I like the analogy that like a Ferrari is really cool, but will like a Toyota Camry get me from A to B reliably, safely, affordably for 20 years? Absolutely. So I think making sure you are mindful of what your budget is, that space that is available, what can we actually put in there, and then prioritize things that are going to make the biggest impact or make your dollar go as far as it can. And we kind of, when we're looking at, what's actually going to go into the space, there's kind of these, again, it's like a punch list or kind of a tier list of where we need to start and kind of what are the things that are last on the list. And it all starts with infrastructure. It is a digital sport, esports. We need access to the internet most of the time in order to play. There are always exceptions to the rule, but in generally, we have to be connected to the internet to be able to, play our games against other schools. And what does that connectivity look like? What we found is that in most cases, you don't have to go super overboard with your internet. You might, find that, a little jarring, but I think when you are doing a lot of the esports activity, it happens after school, right? Most of the time it's, after school, we're playing our games or we're practicing, and you don't have, the 200 Chromebooks running around and the other devices that are constantly pinging your network. Most of that traffic is over and done with by the time that you're setting up practice or getting ready for a match. So in most cases, I think we found that schools don't need to add extra internet access. Until maybe, you grow a facility large enough to where it makes sense. A lot of times that's, again, like Tony said, you can think about this in stages where year one is let's get started, get that proof of concept. Maybe in year two, we address some of the issues that we found in year one. And that could be, bumping the internet up from, 500 meg to a gig or something along those lines. That's actually what we did with the Jamestown lab. We started with a lab of 15 computers. We had a 500 meg connection to that room. And for the first year, it worked great. In year two, we added 15 more computers, and then all of a sudden trying to do updates on 30 machines was tough to do on that, limited connection. So we did make the decision to go to a gig for our facility, and that worked great. And that was kind of where we stayed during the time that I was, at the college. I think one of the things that has become kind of like not a hard and fast rule, but something that's super common and kind of best practice is to separate that network, through something like a VLAN or kind of just maybe a whole nother network altogether, getting that traffic away from the other stuff that's happening in the school. Tony mentioned the firewall and stuff. Those permissions are going to need to be different for your gaming machines than, your standard desktop that's in a lab or in a library or something that is going to be used, throughout the school day. Chances are you've got Rocket League and Epic Games blocked on, your normal devices, but you're going to need to have access to that to be able to launch those titles. So having a conversation with your network administrator to say, what ports do we need to open, or what's our strategy with allowing access. There's not a right or a wrong way to do it. It's just kind of up to the comfort level of your IT staff and your esports program and the people that are in charge. I would love, Adam, since your day job is in that tech world, can you talk a little bit about what you guys have done on the infrastructure side and kind of how you've set things up?
Yeah, so like I said, we're in the lab, and the lab was actually already sectioned off already. So in my firewall, I can apply any rules that I need to this VLAN that already existed. And like you mentioned, Rocket League, Epic Games, a couple of the other titles, especially Nintendo titles, they hit the firewall, and you have to make exceptions in the firewall. And every one of them's different, but talk to your IT, your network person, and they can punch a hole through the firewall. That's what they like to say.
Sure.
But then, if it's an isolated place where that's only happening for that lab, or you can even schedule it where it only happens after school, and then during school, it blocks those ports. So yes, that was a major part of getting started, was like having computers, loading the titles, seeing if they play. And yeah, they would never play because we usually try to block everything.
Sure.
So then it started the process of like figuring out what exactly is getting blocked, and then opening that up accordingly.
Super. Tony, I know from a couple other state organizations that we've worked with, there is like a help document or, something that is distributed out to the schools when they sign on that has maybe like a list of network ports or kind of like things to look out for, or kind of a cheat sheet for the tech people at the schools. Does MOSEF have something like that available?
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, can I share screen? Because but no, if
Oh,
you,
yeah. Um,
um,
Let me stop my share, try and go for it. And if not, I'll make sure you have access to do
all
that.
right, let me see. Up, there we go. All right, so as soon as you said it, I clicked fast. So if this is the
Perfect.
MOSEF, website here, this is over on the left tab here, if you can see it, it says resources. And if you click
Yep.
on that, it says for schools. And you click on that. And here's the MOSEF hardware recommendations by game. So this is like your computer hardware side. And then here's your allow list. So everything that you need, that information, for this makes no sense to me. It makes way more sense to Adam and not me. But this is apparently what the IT people need to see. So we have all of that taken care of for you.
Awesome.
And then I'll stop sharing, give you back the power.
Perfect. Yeah, great stuff to be able to have, quick access to, and definitely there's a ton of really great technical savvy people that are in MOSEF leadership that I know are definitely willing to help out if needed. So the last thing on the infrastructure side that I want to talk about is just, making sure that you have a plan for updates. The game of basketball has had roughly the same rules for the last 30 years, right? Maybe longer. Esports, like especially like a game that has a continual update cycle, gets a new rules update every 2 weeks, right? So in a lot of cases, you have to download those updates or make sure that they're installed on your computer before you can actually launch the game. Kind of going back to my example of that, 500 meg connection for 30 machines and trying to download an update. Those 30 computers are fighting over that bandwidth. And, the more you add to, hey, I'm clicking update on Overwatch maybe, and it's a bigger update that's, 8-9 gigs that I have to do before we can launch the game. If I'm trying to update even 5 computers at 4 o'clock and we've got a match that's supposed to start, chances are you're not going to start on time. So having a strategy in place to make sure that those updates happen either in off hours or it's automatically done or maybe sped up by something like a cache. Those are things that you'll want to have a strategy in place. Like I said, talk to your network people, talk to your IT folks. And in some cases, you can do those things automatically. When I was working at Jamestown, we had work study students that would come in, and part of their responsibility or being a part of the team was they would come in a couple hours before practice when they had a free period, and they would, make sure everything was updated before we got there at the end of the day. So there might be different ways. Again, there's not like a right or a wrong way to do it, but it's something that you'll have to think about when you're building out your lab, is having a plan for those updates to come through. So, and we get to talk about devices. What are we playing on? What do we need? How many machines do we need? Those are kind of like the golden questions, right? And a lot of times it starts with quantity and really what games are you playing? A lot of the esports titles nowadays are 5-on-5. In the past, Overwatch was 6-on-6, so this number has changed a little bit. And I even think that there was like a test happening where Overwatch might go back to 6-on-6.
There was, yeah.
Makes a whole nother wrinkle in this, but typically, at least for now, the golden number is really 5 machines to get started. That lets you play all of the team titles. And if you're on a budget and can only do 3, that still gives you access to be able to play Rocket League competitively with a full roster with that 3-on-3 environment. So a lot of schools will take a look at like, okay, what's the minimum number I need to put a starting lineup out there? And then double it to try and have like an A and a B team or a varsity and a JV be able to practice and play against each other during practice every day. So I think if you looked at like all of the schools across the country that Bytespeed works with, I think our average deployment size is technically it's like 8 and change. But a lot of schools will kind of go with that 5 or 10 machine setup to get started. And then, kind of going back to that conversation of you can build this, over the course of a few years. You might start with 5 or 10 machines in year 1. And then in year 2, maybe you have a little bit more budget and you can add 5 more. And now we've got 15. So it's something that you can do over time. But a lot of people will start with, 5 or 10 is typically the average. And then as far as specs are concerned, we'll get into a couple of example builds here in a second. But we've got a couple of things that are actually working for us. Esports titles are really well optimized to run on, I guess, what we would consider like entry level gaming hardware, right? The developers of these titles, your Epic Games, your Riot, Blizzard, they want as many people playing their games as possible, so they're not going to gatekeep Overwatch by you needing a $4,000 gaming computer to be able to play their game, right? It's going to be a lot lower to where they can have as big of a player base as possible. So a lot of times you want to look at like what's the bare minimum to run the game smoothly, and then also kind of pair that with a little bit of a future proofing conversation of like, are we buying hardware today that's going to still be relevant, 3, 4, 5 years from now? And maybe that's, when our next budget will be able to afford to replace machines. It might not be for 4 or 5 years. So we want to make sure that the devices that we're going to buy today are going to make it. And so we've kind of come up with at Bytespeed kind of this like gold standard or kind of entry level golden rule, I guess, is where we start a lot of example builds. And it's, you might look at that spec list and say that's actually pretty, entry level. It's not as high as some people might expect. A lot of times, we're working with smaller processors, at more kind of lower on the stack. So like your i5, Ryzen 5, that's a lot of where we start folks at. A lot of esports titles are really only take advantage of, 1 or 2 cores. You don't need these big beefy processors that are really built for multitasking and doing a lot more than just playing a game. So we can get away with using kind of like more entry level system. 16 gigs of RAM is really kind of like the gold standard for right now. You get some diminishing returns after 16, like if you go up to 32, which would be the next step up. For just like pure gaming performance, 16 is kind of where the sweet spot is right now. And if you're going to do streaming or video editing or other things, then maybe you go to 32. On a storage perspective, we've moved to a terabyte as kind of our golden rule, just because storage right now has been fairly cheap. To go from that 500 gig SSD to a terabyte is a pretty affordable upgrade to make. And with the size of files being what they are nowadays, a Windows install takes up more space than it ever has. And some of these games, I think the typical size is like 40 to 50 gigs of space that you need. So making sure that you have enough space on those computers to store all of the game files is really important. Kent just put something in here. Is that the only change I would have made on the machines that he had got was the spring for the terabyte NVMe instead of the 512, just to make some upgrades now. And I think that's a great point. Storage and RAM especially are cheap, and those are worthwhile things to go for that 16 gigs or the terabyte. And not having to juggle what's actually installed when you have limited space is something to definitely keep in mind. On the graphics card perspective, I do have to update this now. Unfortunately, the 1660 Supers are a thing of the past. For a long time, that was kind of the entry point. They were rock solid, $200 graphics cards that played most of the esports titles out there really, really well on kind of like your, competitive settings. You were not cranking things up to ultra and turning on ray tracing. But having a good entry point to play the games and have the performance and the frames that we need for FPS and for other things like that. Nowadays, that really should be like a 4060 or like the Intel A750. We've had a lot of success with as a cheaper, more budget option that still does pretty well, especially on kind of like your games like Rocket League, where there's not a lot going on, where we can really crank out as much horsepower from the graphics card as we need and still not have to spend a ton on that configuration. So that on the entry level side, that's really, it hasn't changed too much, but that's where we start a lot of our K-12 builds, especially. If you have a little bit more budget in the tank, or you want to do more things like streaming or video editing, maybe it's a more of a curriculum machine where you need a little bit of extra horsepower too. Then we kind of crank things up to the right-hand side of things, that mid-tier system. Just a step up on the processor, i7, Ryzen 7, somewhere in there. Kind of already talked about the RAM perspective, with that multitasking, processing more data, doing more things than just playing a game, then 32 gigs kind of comes in handy. Storage space shouldn't really need to change too much. And then maybe you jump that graphics card up to, now it should probably say 4060 Ti, or, like your 4070 Super is really as high as you would ever need to go for gaming stuff. And then again, standard heatsink and power supplies are kind of where we're sitting now. Adam, Tony, when you guys were choosing builds for your systems and stuff, what conversations did you have on like what you wanted to shoot for? Was it more price driven or was it more spec driven? Take us through kind of what you guys talked about internally at your schools when deciding on hardware.
I think I know Adam's more the tech person, so I'll give a different perspective. So as a principal, I knew what my budget was and how much money I could allocate. So I had to figure out what machines would work within that budget. And if you're in that spot, like I'm kind of a little bit dangerous because I've built several of my own machines and I'm a gamer, so I knew what I wanted in it. And I remember going to a company that shall not be named for the first, computers we bought, and I was amazed at how much they were charging me for the computers, and I could make 2 computers on my own for the price that they were charging me because there was a lot of upsell on it. Saying stuff like I needed a 4080 Ti and everything else. So I had to start with my budget. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to shop around as much as I wanted to because of some other contractual obligations with my district. But not to, to plug Gravity Gaming, but it's the reason why we work with them. When I went to Webster and we didn't have those same contractual obligations with a computer provider, I went to Gravity Gaming because I knew that they were going to build the machine that is reasonable and for a reasonable price. And so I always have to start with my budget because that's where I go. But then I also look for somebody who's not trying to charge me $400, $450, $500 for 4060 that's in a computer, and so I look for fair pricing and a good product, and that's what has always drawn me back to Gravity Gaming.
So I'll chime in too. We started with get a quote. So I reached out, got a quote from Bytespeed. And your first year getting 5 or 10 computers or however many, that might be a little bit of sticker shock for admin. So I worked actually with Josh on like, hey, can we get this adjusted a little bit? And then we went with the entry level, and that met our budget for the PCs that we needed. We are still running those PCs, and this is year 6. So if you can get 5 years out of a computer, you've gotten your money's worth. And those 1660s are in them, and they're still cranking away at Rocket League. Now Overwatch 2, it was Overwatch 1 when we first bought these, so there's a little bit of upgrades. And then one thing I wanted to point out to other coaches, the future proof means like, look at these other titles that you might want to play in the future. I never anticipated that we would run a Halo season, and we did. And Halo doesn't run very well on 1660s. So I was able to get a few other graphics cards just for a couple computers. And then we're looking at Apex Legends. That's a newer title. So that may be more taxing than like Rocket League or Overwatch. So kind of, do a little bit of research on what you think is coming your way. And don't, you can get by with the entry level, but if you're wanting to add titles, pay attention to how hard they're going to run. By the way, Josh, we need to talk about upgrading some GPUs.
Sounds good, Adam.
Sorry, real quick. I know
Yeah.
there's a question, and I know we are talking computers and Intel and everything else. If you are really strapped on a budget and you're in this and you're like, holy cow, I don't even know if my school will buy me 3 computers, right? Remember, you can do it in steps, and you can start with something as simple as a Nintendo Switch, and you can start your esports program for around $800 with like a Nintendo Switch. Oh, there it is. I jumped ahead. Sorry.
No,
And
you're
so
good.
But if you can start with that and then capture the experience and bring your admin in to see the impact you're having, or even bring in some school board members to see the impact you're having, that can then open up the budget so that you can you know, get those 5, 10, 15 computers. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I bring up the console side, especially for the budget conversation, right? I do recommend that you spring for the Switch OLED for right now. It's got the built-in Ethernet port on the dock, and you don't have to worry around with adapters or anything like that. It's $50 more than the base Switch version, and all of this might be irrelevant in 6 months when Nintendo finally launches or announces their next Switch 2 or whatever it's going to be called. But for right now, a Switch OLED with a couple of Pro controllers is a great way to get started. And a lot of schools will just connect that straight up to a Promethean or Optima board. Use big displays that are already in the school that you're using for, your classroom stuff. And you've got a pretty great way to start getting kids involved and kind of build that proof of concept like Tony was saying. The other thing to keep in mind with consoles is just how are you going to store them? I definitely recommend looking for a lockable cabinet kind of solution, or something that you have in your classroom that you can keep things in. Consoles are a lot easier to pick up off the table and grow legs and walk out the door. We've had some schools, that have worked with us in the past have said, security is a conversation that they need to have. So we've done some work with Spectrum and some other companies that do, lockable cabinet storage that you could roll around from room to room, or, someplace that you can have almost like a charging cart for your controllers and your Switch and stuff. Stuff to think about that isn't super expensive, but goes a long way to, if you are starting with that kind of lower budget option, can still really make an impact on the students that are participating. So,
there was a question. Sorry, there was a question
sorry.
from Casey about, is there ability to get sponsored to help purchase computers at the high school level? Vespa sponsored the esports at the college level.
Sure. We're gonna talk about budgeting and money and stuff in a second here, so we'll circle back, but that's a great question, Casey. Kent said that they hooked theirs up to a 75-inch clear touch with screen. That's awesome. And then Joe made a comment about smaller screens for FPS and stuff, moving to 24 to 27-inch monitors, which is kind of a good spot to go back to peripherals real quick before we get to the how, and just talk about what we've seen, or kind of what works well in the esports space as far as monitors are concerned, and some of the other things that you'll want to look at for your facilities. I have been a big proponent of a 24-inch 144 hertz monitor is all you really need for high school esports. I think looking at refresh rate and really shooting for that 144, so it's a dedicated gaming monitor. It shows pixels or refreshes the frame much faster than your normal desktop monitor. It's in a different presentation that I do, but I actually run through the difference of your 60 hertz monitor shows a new frame every I think it's every 16 milliseconds. And then the next step up, that 144 hertz panel will be at I think it's 10 or 8 milliseconds. So it's a much faster. 24-inch is really just kind of the nice size for your budget, and is kind of just the standard that you see. There are some people that will go for a 27-inch. Kent mentioned that they do 32-inch ones, and the kids really like the extra real estate. Really, just if I can make a recommendation, to just never buy a curved monitor. I think that's something that I've said in multiple presentations with MOSEF in the past, but to
I
have
love
that
our
little,
curved monitors.
yeah.
I bought them from Bytespeed.
Oh yeah. Well,
They're
a
awesome.
foot and mouth moment there.
Is that legit?
I-
Did that just happen?
Yeah,
I guess it
they're
did.
right there. What are
Um,
you doing, Josh?
I know. I should have checked before.
No, they're
And
really,
Ken
when we
mentioned
put
his are
those in,
curved,
the
too.
kids loved them. I think they're cool too.
Sure. really the refresh rate is the thing you want to look for. I guess is what we'll take away from the monitor conversation. For keyboards and mice, shoot for something mechanical. They're going to be more responsive. You can customize them. They're going to be more durable than just like your standard office mouse and keyboard. You can change the things like the DPI on the mouse to be more sensitive, or the keycaps to be, a different tactile feel when you click them down. You don't have to break the bank on peripherals. You can find really good. We've got some Logitech stuff on the screen here. They're kind of their G series, their standard gaming stuff is like 40 or $50. Doesn't have to be super expensive, and it does make a bigger difference in kind of the overall experience of playing. And then the headset conversation, make sure that you've got something that, you can hear game audio with, but also, be able to talk to your teammates. I think the ability to hear game audio is super important. And yes, your players might be sitting right next to each other. They might be able to talk to each other without the headsets, but you're missing out on half the information if you don't have the game audio. So having a good microphone and good headset is, again, something that doesn't have to cost us super much. The Logitech ones that we kind of start people out at are $50. So you don't have to break the bank on peripherals. You should be able to build out a really great station and not have to worry too much about going super over budget. The kind of the overall round number that when we talk about desktops plus peripherals, I generally tell people about $2,000 is a safe number to shoot for. It's an easy, round number that you can say, if we're shooting for 5 stations, we need to have about $10,000 in our bank account to be able to build out a new station for each one. And a lot of times, we come in under that $2,000. But it's a nice way to kind of budget and talk to your admin about what you need to shoot for on the fundraising side. Budgeting and going back to that sponsorship conversation, there are a lot of different ways that schools will fund their esports programs. I'm a big advocate of working for an annual sustainable budget, just like your other activities. Football gets a budget every year, right? Esports should eventually be in the same conversation. And I don't care if it comes from student life or IT or the Department of Underwater Basket Weaving. That should be the goal. That being said, a lot of schools are not able to do that in the first couple of years. So we look at grant writing is super common, other fundraising, sponsorships, that kind of stuff. Is really common to help kind of with that big startup cost of getting the lab in place. And then like your annual costs are going to be very, very much less than what it takes to actually get the lab up and running. Because you're not having to buy all of that equipment every single year. Once you have it in place, it should last, 4, 5, 6 years. One great resource that I want everybody to write down, take a screenshot of, keep in your back pocket is bytespeed.com/resources/funding. We've got a big list of, I think it's like up to 60 or 70 different links now of different grants that we know school districts have applied for in the past and gotten help with funding for equipment. A lot of it is got like a little synopsis underneath, so you might be able to apply for some, you might not qualify for all of them, but the big one, and the one that we've seen a lot of schools actually use, is Carl Perkins money for CTE. Kind of goes back to that dual use case idea that we had before on needing equipment for curriculum and for classroom work, but also having the horsepower to play games at the end of the day. Got a lot of schools use Perkins money or write grants in the past to kind of help out. There's other really great resources out there for funding or for fundraising. E-Team sponsor, something that I did as a college athlete. It's kind of that college or like the crowdfunding. So one player goes to mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, neighbor, sister, whatever, and asks for $5 from each of those people. And then all of a sudden he comes back with $50. And, you kind of multiply that by the whole team, you've done some supplemental fundraising, right? It's probably not going to fund your entire lab, but it could pay for jerseys for the year, or other smaller things, right? It shouldn't be the whole purchase, but it could be good supplemental funding. There are some schools that do apparel sales, or they might have like a team store through whoever they get their jerseys from. Like Guardian Pro Line is super common, or a company that we refer people to. Acquire is also another clothing company that we've sent schools to in the past, that you can set up a school store on. And then you get a portion of sales back as like a little team fundraiser. And then equipment raffles, something that I did as a college coach, was once our machines were kind of out of warranty and ready to be recycled and refreshed, we actually sold those computers as a team fundraiser. And we had students and professors at the school actually would buy, the machines that we were essentially retiring from the esports program. We sold them for $500 a pop, and it helped pay for stuff out of our next technology budget. So don't be afraid to get creative. There's a Southern Illinois school that I love telling the story of. Marvin Lindsay is the guy at Sandoval High School in Illinois, and his middle school computer science class that he teaches, they build an arcade cabinet with a Raspberry Pi and kind of build out things over the course of the semester. That's their classroom work. Their like homework and stuff is to build out this arcade cabinet. And then they sell like raffle tickets to do that as a fundraiser. And that they bought like a whole lab worth of smaller desktops, not for esports, but they bought like little Knux for a different project with that money. So cool ways to get involved and get your kids involved with that fundraising, and to kind of help with the overall cost.
Josh, another couple things I've seen other schools do.
Yeah.
Reach out to local businesses and see if
Just
they'll
gonna
put
say
their,
that. Yeah. Yep. Go for it.
sorry.
No,
See if
no.
they'll put their name on the back of your jersey or on the side or something. We've had our ISP sponsor us and bought us jerseys. And then I've seen other schools sell advertisement time on their stream. And so like while you're waiting for the stream to start, it'll just shuffle through different advertisements. I thought that was a pretty clever way to fundraise.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to Casey's question before about the sponsorships and stuff. I always tell people, like, start with your local businesses and your booster club and the people in your community that are already supporting the school. Those are a lot of times those asks can be smaller and therefore can be a lot more successful than trying to go find like a big nationwide company that probably gets asked by every person under a rock if they can sponsor their esports program. But like Frank's Plumbing on Main Street in Richland, might be who you talk to get $1,000 to help pay for mice or keyboards or something, and then you can put logos on jerseys or on the wall. I know there's some customers that we have that do video production. They actually like shoot commercials and edit them and kind of help out with helping local businesses in the community and getting some stuff in return, and kind of it's stuff that they're invested in the school and in the students, and those are really great, meaningful projects that you can do and work on as an esports program that make a direct impact in your community, get more people invested in the success of your program. And like I said, a lot of times those are more successful than like just writing an email to Nationwide Insurance and saying, hey, sponsor our program. Things to definitely think about. Anything to add here, guys? What kind of
for funding, also, if you are fortunate to be in a school district that has like a foundation, both districts that I've been in Columbia Public Schools and Webster Groves have foundations where they want to support innovation, they want to support things like that. So if you can, again, it's like writing a grant to it. I've had success through that. Also, if you have a PTO or a PTA, a parent organization that's raising money for the school, if you bring them in and can tell your story and tell them what your vision is, you might be able to get that Nintendo Switch paid for. That it just depends on the community resources that you have available, the school resources you have available, but don't also ignore stuff that are fundraising opportunities that currently exist within the school that you can write grants for and things like that. So Yeah,
For sure.
just wanted to plug that as well.
Yeah, no, great point. Adam, anything else from your guys' side?
No, like you said, see if there's a booster club that wants to sponsor you, or we had our local ISP. They're looking for, well, like Tony said, things like going on in schools, innovation, just kind of like putting their name out there. Hey, we're your internet provider, and you're able to game on the internet connection. So just be creative.
Awesome. Yeah, anything else, as far as kind of like your guys' journey with your programs, building things out that you want to mention? We're kind of at the end of the hour here. And definitely just want to say again, thanks so much for being here. Any closing thoughts from you guys?
If you are starting a program and you're not familiar with MOSEF, you're in Missouri, join MOSEF. Get on. It's free. You can get on our Discord because once you get plugged into that, it's like a huge amount of resources. Like I showed you the links that we have for your allowing games and stuff, but it's 24/7, 365. If you need assistance with everything from how to console somebody because you're doing cuts and they didn't make the team, to how do you run a practice, to all the things esports, it's there. So if you are brand new and you came to this space because you wanted to learn more, please check out MOSEF, and you can find our website at mosef.org.
Yeah, and just to the coaches that are new, you might feel overwhelmed. There's probably a lot of information overload. I was kind of thrown into this in 2019, and I, had to figure it out as we went. And then here I am 6 years later, still doing it, and I love it. So there are people in MOSEF that we've all been in the same boat, and we're all there to help. We've got a lot of IT people, a lot of people with experience. So yeah, love to help you out. Love to help you get started.
Awesome. Well, again, Adam, Tony, thanks so much for being here and sharing your expertise and your experience. Really appreciate the feedback and kind of being able to tell your side of the story too. When we talk about something that's, a lot of times it's like building out a facility, spending money, it's I'm glad we had you guys on and not just the talking vendor head for an hour. So I really appreciate you guys joining in and sharing. And big thanks to Intel for sponsoring the webinar and some of the other sponsorship stuff that we're doing with MOSEF this year for the next couple of years, actually. So definitely want to shout them out. And again, if you have questions or want to get in touch with anybody here about your own school and your own situations, feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk with you. And until next time, good luck and have a great fall semester.